Lawsome by Consultwebs. Breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello, all our Lawsome listeners. Today on the show, we have Tom Kirkham, founder and CEO of Kirkham.it and IronTech Security. He has more than 30 years of experience in software design, network administration, and cybersecurity. He's worked with organizations all around the country. During his career, Tom has received multiple software design awards and founded other acclaimed technology businesses. He's an active member of the FBI's Arkansas Untitled Chapter and frequently speaks about the latest in security threats. Today's topic is cybersecurity for lawyers. Welcome, Tom. Very glad to have you today on such an important topic.
Yes, absolutely, and I'm very happy to be here.
Good. Well, the use of technology in the legal profession is obviously increasing, especially in the last few years with the pandemic. It's beginning to become I would say, a vital role in any law firm's business operations. Even dealing with clients, technology is, bridging a gap in communication. So with all of the amount of this confidential information that lawyers are handling day in and day out, it's obviously critical to have some type of up-to-date, reliable security system within the business. And I'm certain you would agree there, Tom. But based on your experience, what are you seeing with respect to cybersecurity? Could you explain, maybe by starting just with the basics of cybersecurity for law firms? What does that even mean?
Well, it means, upping your game a little bit. The vast majority of law firms and, frankly, businesses of all shapes, sizes, Fortune 2000 companies, it really doesn't matter. What has happened over the past 5 or 6 years is the hacking game has changed. And by that I mean that now nation-state cyber warfare tools, techniques, procedures, and tactics are now being used against us. The days of somebody hacking your law firm that's doing it for street cred or bragging rights and all of that stuff, that's been over with for years and years and years. We're talking about professional criminals, nation-state, military, cyber weapon offenses, terrorist groups, hacktivists such as Anonymous, WikiLeaks, and others that are doing it at scale. There is not a single law firm that doesn't need to consider the risk to their law firm if their client data is breached, if all of their files are locked up in a ransomware attack, and various other ways to hack into a law firm. Furthermore, rules of professional conduct, RPC 1.1 and 1.6 specifically address the fact that you've got to take reasonable efforts to secure your client data from unauthorized access. You've got to protect it. And ransomware is the biggest threat of all. And these are done at scale. They're done at volume. They don't know who you are. They don't even care who you are. They're after that ransom payment, $3,000, $5,000, $50,000. Most people think of ransomware attacks like Colonial Pipeline. What was that, $12 million ransom? JBS was 4 or 5 million, I can't remember which, and on and on and on. City of Atlanta. But the vast majority of them are in the $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 range. And even the ransom demand itself is automated. It just quickly goes out, scans the network, and see how many devices it is, and resets the initial ransom demand. And then if you don't pay it, there's commonly, in the last 3 or 4 years, there's almost always an extortionware component. So even if you have a backup, that doesn't matter. If you don't pay the ransom, they're going to release the data or sell the data in whatever manner they see fit in order to make the most money, usually. So if it's Chinese, if you're a patent lawyer, you got to worry about intellectual property theft. And it goes on and on and on.
It seems like it's complex, and I think it's from my experience in working with law firms, you have certainly a certain population or percentage of the industry that's well versed in this, and they're definitely staying attuned to it. But there is a large percentage of the industry itself that really they're not as tech savvy, and they don't care to be. And so I think you've clearly highlighted the threat, and just hearing that, I'm not familiar with all of those areas, which highlights major red flags for me. But for someone who maybe is not as IT experienced, how would you start breaking down what can they begin to do? What are some basic things that they can begin doing to safeguard this data? If they're assuming that maybe they already have some traditional methods in place to keep them safe.
Well, I want to back up with one point here and talk about IT. What IT is all about is improving the bottom line. That investment that you've made in computers and servers on your network and this, that, and the other, their objective, if you outsource your IT or you have an IT staff, whatever, their objective is to keep everything running, to make sure nothing goes down, to make sure all the equipment is good and fast and it's working and they answer help desk calls and things like that. That's their objective. That's what IT's objective is. It's a bottom line focused operational role that's all about increasing the profitability for the law firm. And to the attorney, it's more about, I don't want to know about this technology. I just want it to fade into the background so I can practice law.
That's fair.
Work on my cases and things like that. Okay? Now, InfoSec, or cybersecurity, as the mainstream refers to it, has a different focus. It's about understanding the risk to your firm, to your clients, to perhaps your employees, for all various sorts of regulatory and compliance things that you have to be aware of. And so even if you don't want to understand it, that's fine. I don't expect attorneys to be, or most to be, experts in everything. Finance and marketing and all of the other components that comes to running a business. But especially if you're the managing partner or the CEO or the owner of the LLC, whatever it may be, you've got to know where to get the right cybersecurity defenses. And that's where a managed security services provider comes into play. It is not an IT role. And in fact, most of the time we engage with an IT staff and they're frankly relieved that they don't have to worry about security because they know it's a different specialty. It would be something akin to going to see a divorce attorney for patent law. There may be somebody listening that can do both of those excellent, but it's not run of the mill. It's like, there's not very many cardiologists that are expert neurosurgeons. So you really have to think about it. And it's a big, big world. Both IT and security are both big worlds. And so you can't be an expert on the latest threats and the latest threat actors. That's why you need to go to a professional, just like you do with insurance and many, many other things that you're familiar with in a daily business management when it comes to your practice.
So you would suggest, from the basics, like looking at what data they have, you believe immediately the first step would be to begin consulting with a cybersecurity expert.
Yes, absolutely. And here's a good rule of thumb. If you have antivirus, your IT guy or gal has recommended to put on, McAfee's Internet Protection Suite. That's not adequate anymore. There's a whole new class of products that you can't go to Best Buy and buy it, but it will protect you. 99.999% chance you will not be affected by a ransomware attack. It will not execute. And that class of product is known as EDR. Now, it goes by a lot of different names, and it's always constantly changing. But the bottom line is, if you're using something that you can buy off the shelf at Best Buy, it's no longer what I consider, referring back to RPC 1.6, reasonable efforts. And if I was asked to testify on that, and they had one of those type defensive tools in place, yeah, I would say that's not reasonable efforts anymore. And I'm not talking about my opinion. We're talking about the White House cyber czar, Ann Neuberger, acting cyber advisor to the president. We're talking about international standards such as the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology's Cybersecurity Framework. We're talking about ISO standards. We're talking about practically all forms of various industries' compliance requirements to do this. And EDR is just one part of that. But the White House themselves say you need to have a cybersecurity team engaged constantly to monitor and respond and mitigate threats. Whether it's successful or not, it still has to be investigated.
Tom, I would definitely want to come back to a topic because you made a great point in terms of, investing in this area is actually a bottom line area. It's an area to protect assets and protect revenues and, more importantly, profits to operate a business. And I want to dive in on that topic. But before we do that, you had listed a number of threats, and it's clear, you know this area. You've been in the business over 30 years. But any particular threats for law firms that you would highlight or come back to, just to reiterate that, specifically anything you've seen that law firms are facing just over the last year?
Yeah, what's trending right now is, of course, ransomware is. That's trending for everybody of all shapes, sizes. It doesn't matter if you're in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't matter if you're a one-horse law firm. Or 100 attorney law firm or 1,000 attorney law firm. It simply doesn't matter. Ransomware is number one threat. We are seeing a big increase in what's known in the business as a BEC. That's a business email compromise. And especially the small firms or the single attorney firms, we see them commonly use these free email services such as Yahoo, AOL even, Gmail, and these accounts get compromised. This is a true story that just happened, I think second quarter of this year. We signed on a new small law firm. And one of our recommendations was to I forgot what they use, but get off the Yahoo. Get off the public email service and get your own private email on a professionally managed mail server so it's secure. And they elected not to do that. We do have things you've got to be compliant with us to be a client because we can't take the risk on if you don't do these things. But that right now is one of those optional things. It wasn't a month later after we onboarded them that, unbeknownst to them, their email had been compromised, and they had sent an invoice to a client for a 5-digit invoice. Okay, so it's real money.
Yeah.
It got intercepted, and they changed the routing number and the bank account number, and the client paid the hacker, not the attorney.
Ouch. Yeah.
Now that is embarrassing to the attorney, and I don't know if it's ever been sorted out. It's kind of not within our, it's not within our wheelhouse to figure that out because they weren't following all the recommendations. But we're talking about a modest investment and getting away from these email services that are constantly compromised, and it touches on privacy. And I'll circle back around to that. Another thing that we're seeing is compromised websites. That's dramatically increased. And by that I mean if you just throw your website up there, you never do the software updates, because there's nothing magical about a web server. It's got an operating system. It's got a database. It's probably powered by a platform known as WordPress. And other things are on this web server. Well, it's just software. It's just a computer, and it has to be patched, and the software has to be updated to address security vulnerabilities. And if you don't do that, if your website is not professionally secured and managed on a day-to-day basis, someone's going to compromise the software, and then what's going to happen is they may use it to distribute a server backdoor or a ransomware attack to a site visitor. Or do the con job of the pop-up that says your computer is infected with a bunch of viruses and it looks like it's from Microsoft and it's got an 800 number. Well, that's just a con job, but they're using a compromised website in order to inject that onto the visitor screen. Now, you don't want to infect a prospect.
There are a lot of law firms accepting fees, taking payments, holding confidential client information on the back end of that site, or at least through portals. That's right.
And those are some things right off the top of my head. And then we see changes in threat actor activity. It seems like the last year, Iran pops up and down, various different things. But, when it comes to nation state attacks, I think the big one is China is really into stealing intellectual property. And even if you're not handling a client's actual intellectual property, but I'm sure you are if you're a patent attorney, you can still become a threat vector to the client, just like that client that sent the money to the wrong routing number and wrong bank account. You can still be a threat vector to your client, just as all of our clients could be a threat vector to us. Mm-hmm. So you've got to think of it as all of the stakeholders in your organization, and then wrap layer and layer and layer to of defense to such a point that you've comfortably addressed the risk you're willing to take to your law firms and your reputation. Because even if you've got cybersecurity insurance, that doesn't buy your reputation back.
Yeah, you're picking up the pieces at that point. What was the privacy topic you wanted to come back to?
Privacy and security go hand in hand, and especially when it comes to public email, but social media. Basically, if you're using a service for free, you're the product. That is their business model. They sell your data. Security is not the number one objective. Okay? Mm-hmm. So if you're using services that you're not paying for, chances are security is down the list a little ways. So think about the data that you're putting into that service. Now, I'll have to admit that Gmail does have better security, but it's still, in many instances, they're still using the free version of Gmail for doing normal correspondence. And I think that almost all attorneys should seriously consider using an encrypted email service, because so much stuff that flows through there. A lot of people don't realize that email doesn't just exist on the sender and the receiver's computers in an indefinite amount of time. It exists at a spam filter server. It exists on the mail server itself sometimes for months or even years, decades even in some cases. And if those get compromised because security is not job one, then all of those are accessible. And once you compromise someone's email accounts, you got the keys to the kingdom. Because how do you typically reset a forgotten password? It's through email, right?
Sure.
So think about everything you do is got to be private. That is a layer around it. And when you think about security as opposed to IT, remember that it's a strategic management decision, because it negatively impacts the P&L every month, just like omissions and errors and omissions liability insurance, or professional liability, or malpractice liability insurance. We know as business owners, we know we've got to have certain types of insurance, or else the company is going to go out of business. Mm-hmm. It hasn't gotten to that level yet with cybersecurity, but the businesses that understand that and appreciate it make sure they don't cheap out when it comes to cybersecurity defense, because there's a whole bunch of problems with cybersecurity insurance. Number one, the horse has already left the barn, the old cliche. But number two is there's limits to what they pay out, because they've been paying out a lot. And don't be surprised if the next time your cybersecurity insurance comes up for renewal, they give you a list of 5 things that you have to have in place, or they will not write the policy. And it's a couple of the things that I've already mentioned about that your IT provider is just not going to know.
Do you find, this is more just a question out of curiosity, do you find in working with law firms that many have some level of infrastructure or training for their staff and personnel on the basics of keeping, good, safe browsing habits, email habits, link clicking habits, things like that. Is that common from your experience?
No, absolutely not. And that it's a great point, Tanner. If you do nothing more than implement continuous cybersecurity awareness training, you cut your risk in half. Mm-hmm. All risk, ransomware, all sorts of risk. Cuts it in half right there, just because they can learn how to identify these phishing emails that typically have ransomware payloads, but they could be other things. And that is actually the very first step. But that's yet again, it's just a layer. And part of our process, a part of any security organization's process, is determining where the data is, what the vulnerabilities and weaknesses are, and then adding additional or improving existing security defensive layers. It's known in the military business as defense in depth, because we have to assume that one layer is going to be breached. Like, we get training all the time. Every week we get a simulated phishing email. And even as InfoSec specialists, there's only one person in the company that has 100%. Even I have fallen for one of our simulated phishing emails. That's how good they are. 5 years ago, it wasn't very uncommon to get an email that was obvious it was a scammer. Had misspelled words, broken English, bad grammar, bad graphics, and on and on and on. But these days, remember, these are professionals.
Right.
They make millions of dollars a year. And they are experts at psychological manipulation techniques.
This is good, Tom. I want to take it back to the business side, because I do find that attorneys, that is what's driving them. That's what's driving, where they're going to apply time and energy. And so, we've covered obviously protecting information, the keys to that, why it's important, and avoiding cyber attacks. But what about, coming back to the profit and the black and white of it? What are the advantages beyond what we've talked about in securing law firms' data? What else are law firms experiencing in actually taking time to think through this and invest in this?
Well, I think it's the cost of doing business. I mean, to me, it's that simple. I think law firms are woefully unprotected. However, we that's one of our biggest verticals. We do a lot of law firms all over the country. And it's really an awareness problem. This is my job. I function as a chief evangelist in the company, and my job is to educate. And the biggest problem with that is people are just not aware. Another element is, just hoping it won't happen to us, or, we're a little firm. Why would somebody want to attack us? And that's my day-to-day job, and I frequently say this is the cost of doing business. And it will happen to you. And if there's anyone listening that's had a ransomware attack and you haven't engaged a security specialist to do an analysis or an assessment of your firm, and your network was not forensically investigated, I promise you there's other malicious payloads that exist on your network. We have never gone into a new client, that's had successful attacks in the past and not discovered other things just waiting to be exploited. So, like I said, this is the investment you put in IT does or should positively affect your P&L, because it's an operations decision. It's a real easy management decision. But security, the right kind of investment in security, is a leadership decision, and it's an execution of a good long-term strategy for the viability of the law firm.
I see so much. I would just say it's lack of understanding, ignorance, and that's not being negative. It's just maybe law firms have the mindset, or attorneys have the mindset, that it just won't happen to them. But I think you've definitely highlighted that. It's clear even just through this pandemic, there's software for everything, seemingly, especially for business owners. And so law firms are starting, hopefully, over the last several years, starting to really get comfortable with adjusting and transitioning, even adapting to new technology. But naturally, just as you've highlighted, more technology that you're utilizing as an infrastructure, the more complex it becomes, the more vulnerable you can be. But I would like to, if you would, talk through, with your experience, talk through what it's like for a law firm that may not be very tech savvy, who's stepping through this process and exploring it for the first time. What's the immersion like into the world of cybersecurity for them in that process? How would you start to kind of cast a vision for them if they wanted to start taking some steps towards securing their firms?
Yeah. And so this is not just the way we do it. It's the right way, though. Once again, it's international standards, and I mean, none of this is rocket science. What the smart leaders are doing is engaging a security specialist, not IT. Okay, I've probably beat that to death, but it's in our experience, about 90% of IT professionals, and I'm talking about been in the business for decades, they do an excellent job, but 90% of them just don't have the expertise to deal with security. All right, so what's going to happen is when you engage with a security company, they're going to want to do some sort of NIST compliant assessment, security assessment, or an audit of security and IT. And what this does, it identifies where everything is. It identifies the weaknesses in the defense and the strengths in the defense. And then that leads in turn to, okay, what additional protection do we need to put in place? What is the bare minimum that needs to be put in place? And what are the others that, depending upon many, many different things, and it goes all the way, these are always customized solutions, okay? Different size, a one-person law firm that does $1 million a year has a different investment profile, or a different cybersecurity profile than an attorney that only does $200,000 a year, a single attorney. So you have to take all of these into considerations. But once you identify all the strengths and weaknesses, then it's about, okay, how do we protect it? It's step number 2 in NIST compliant cybersecurity framework or an assessment. And then you implement. Now, the third and the fourth thing in the NIST is you've got to have in place a monitoring and response system. Now, there's going to be automated monitoring. It's called an intrusion detection system, but you need that to alert InfoSec specialists so they can investigate. And then the fourth part of NIST is they've got to have a response system in place. That means humans as well as automated response. And like I said earlier, if you go back and look at the White House 5 recommendations for businesses of any type, that's going right down their list. A skilled security team already engaged. It's too late after the attack. We don't like to talk to prospects that are in the midst of an attack because we understand that they are a threat to us. In the business, it's a different specialty. It's incident response. It's much easier for us to engage with the client that our tools and techniques and protections are already in places, and our procedures are already in place, and then responding to an event or an anomaly. That's kind of the way it plays out. It's probably a lot more than you needed to know, but the very first step is just knowing where you are. A captain has to know the condition of a ship before he sets sail. Let's find out where you are, and then acknowledge it, and then address the weaknesses and vulnerabilities.
Tom, thank you for that. I've enjoyed learning more about this topic. It's obviously going to be a continuing, growing topic for law firms, and if there's someone who has additional questions, wants to dive in, wants to reach out to you, what's the best way that they can contact you?
IronTechSecurity.com is the best way to get to us. You can have it. There's tons and tons of resources on the site. You can sign up for our threat advisory. We send maybe one every month or two. We try not to, we get a fire hose, hundreds a day, different security alerts. We try to only send out alerts for things that we really want people to pay attention to. So it's not like all these technical things that come out constantly. So once again, that's IronTechSecurity.com. You can schedule a 10-minute talk with an InfoSec specialist there. and just to get a rough idea of where you are, and see what we need to do to protect you. You can, just the tons and tons of resources on the website. I could take any one of these topics, and I have on many other webinars, and spend 30 minutes just talking about it. What I've done today is given you an extremely high-level view of the seriousness of the threat, which, if anything, it's understated. None of this, I'm not overblowing any of it by any means. If I told real, true life stories of things that the InfoSec specialists know has happened, they literally are unbelievable. So don't think that I'm overstating the problem.
Tom, thanks for joining the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Lawsome by Consultwebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next Lawsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.